The train's whistle cut through the desert heat like a blade through silence. When Evelyn Harper stepped onto that platform in Red Springs, New Mexico territory, she carried everything she owned in one carpet bag and everything she hoped for in a single letter. The man who'd promised her a future stood 20 feet away, surrounded by curious townspeople. She smiled. He stared. And when she spoke his name, Caleb Rowan, he answered with 4 words that shattered her world. I never sent for you. What happened next would force an entire town to choose between judgment and grace, between cruelty and courage. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The platform boards creaked beneath Evelyn's worn boots as she descended from the passenger car, her legs unsteady after 3 days of rattling track and sleepless nights. The New Mexico sun bore down with merciless intensity, turning the air thick and shimmering. Dust devils danced across the distant flats, and the smell of creosote and sage drifted on a breeze too hot to offer relief. She clutched her carpetbag with both hands, pressing the letter against her ribs beneath the fabric of her only decent dress, a faded calico that had seen better days but remained free of patches. Around her, Red Springs Station buzzed with the peculiar energy of a small town greeting the weekly train. Women in bonnets whispered behind gloved hands. Men in dusty work clothes paused mid-conversation to stare. Children pointed. Evelyn had expected attention. Mail-order brides always drew eyes. But she hadn't expected the silence that followed her scan of the crowd, the sudden hush that fell when her gaze landed on a tall man standing near the station house. He was broad-shouldered and sun-darkened, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dirt streaked his shirt sleeves, and his hands, calloused, strong, hung loose at his sides. He wasn't watching the train. He was watching the timber being loaded onto a freight wagon, his attention fixed on the work with the focus of a man who measured worth in honest labor. Mr. Rowan? Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. The man turned slowly, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to something harder to name. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, moved from her face to her bag and back again. Behind him, the murmurs grew louder. That's me. His voice was rough, unused to unnecessary words. Evelyn tried to smile, though her lips trembled at the corners. I'm Evelyn Harper, from Pennsylvania. The name hung in the air between them. No recognition flickered in his face. No warmth. No welcome. Just confusion, then something that looked dangerously close to anger. I don't know you. 3 words. Polite enough on the surface, but heavy with finality. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her bag. Behind Caleb, a woman in an expensive traveling suit leaned toward her companion, lips pursing with satisfaction. A younger man snorted, not bothering to hide his amusement. The station master stopped his work entirely, sensing drama. The letter, Evelyn managed, her throat suddenly dry. She fumbled with her bag, extracting the envelope with shaking hands. You wrote to me about a position as your wife. She held it out like evidence at a trial. Caleb didn't take it. He stared at the envelope as though it were a snake coiled to strike, then slowly removed his hat and dragged a hand through dark hair. Ma'am, I never sent any letter. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward through the gathered crowd. Whispers erupted. Someone laughed, a short, cruel bark of sound that cut through Evelyn's composure like glass through silk. You must be mistaken, she said quietly, though even as she spoke, certainty bled from her voice. It has your name. Your ranch. The Box R, 3 miles north of Red Springs. That's my place? Caleb's jaw tightened. But I never sent for a bride. Heat flooded Evelyn's face, not from the sun, but from shame so acute it felt physical. Around them, the crowd pressed closer. She could feel their judgment like hands pushing against her shoulders, forcing her down. A woman muttered something about shameless. A man suggested she'd gotten the wrong town, the wrong man, or worse, made the whole thing up for attention. Evelyn's vision narrowed to Caleb's face, searching desperately for some sign of recognition, some crack in his certainty that would let in light. She found none. I spent everything I had to come here, she whispered. The train fare, my last wages. I gave notice at my position. I came because she'd believed the words in that letter. Because they'd promised not love, she'd been practical enough not to expect that, but respect, partnership, a chance at something better than 12-hour days in a textile mill and a rented room she shared with two other women. Because you thought I wanted you here. Caleb's voice softened slightly, though his expression remained closed. I'm sorry for your trouble, Miss Harper, but there's been a mistake. What's she going to do now? Someone called out. Send her back where she came from. Probably lying about the whole thing. The voices battered against Evelyn's ears, each one a fresh cut. She swayed slightly, the heat and humiliation combining to make the world tilt. But she didn't fall, didn't cry. She'd learned early that tears bought no mercy in this world. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet Caleb's eyes directly. You can send me back. 4 words of her own, simple, dignified, offering him an escape from whatever obligation he might feel. Caleb's expression flickered with something, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect. But before he could respond, a small figure darted through the crowd. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 years old. His shirt hung crooked on thin shoulders, his face smudged with dirt, his hair sticking up in brown tufts that defied any attempt at order. He wore no shoes, and his trousers had been mended so many times the patches outnumbered the original fabric. He stopped directly in front of Evelyn and stared up at her with eyes the same stormy gray as Caleb's. You came? The boy said. His voice carried absolute certainty, as though her arrival was the most natural thing in the world. Evelyn's breath caught. The crowd went silent. Luke! Caleb's voice held a warning. Get back here. But the boy didn't move. He reached out with one small, grubby hand and very carefully took hold of Evelyn's skirt, his fingers curling into the fabric with the fierce grip of someone who'd learned early not to let go of what mattered. I wrote you, Luke said, still looking at Evelyn. I told you we needed you. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water, their ripples spreading outward until they touched everyone present. Evelyn's heart stuttered. She looked from the child's earnest face to Caleb's shocked one and back again. You wrote the letter? Luke nodded solemnly. I know all my letters now, and some words. Mrs. Chen at the Mercantile helped with the hard parts. I told you Pa needs help. I told you I need someone who stays. Caleb moved then, swift and certain, dropping to one knee beside his son. Luke, what did you do? I sent for her. The boy's chin lifted with stubborn pride. Like you said, I could do anything if I tried hard enough. I meant your schoolwork, Caleb said, his voice rough with something that might have been panic or grief or both. Not this. But we do need help, Luke insisted. You work all the time and you're tired and sometimes you forget to eat and there's no one to help with supper or mending or any of the things Ma used to… Enough. The word came out sharp enough to make the boy flinch. Evelyn watched Caleb's face transform, watched guilt replace anger, watched his shoulders curve inward as though taking a blow. He pulled his son close, one large hand cradling the back of the child's head with heartbreaking gentleness. We talked about this, Caleb said quietly. About your ma. About how some things can't be fixed by wanting them. I know. Luke's voice muffled against his father's shoulder. But maybe some things can. The crowd had gone still as stone. Even the earlier mockers seemed caught by the raw honesty of a child's need laid bare. Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to add her own drama to a situation already heavy with it. Caleb stood slowly, keeping one hand on his son's shoulder. He looked at Evelyn, and for the first time she saw past the hardness to the exhaustion beneath, the bone-deep weariness of a man carrying more than any single person should have to bear. Miss Harper. He said her name carefully, as though testing its weight. I don't know what this is. It's a mistake, Evelyn said quietly. One made with good intentions, but still a mistake. I understand that. I'll take the next train east. When's that? Luke asked, his voice sharp with alarm. 3 days, the station master called out, apparently unable to resist contributing to the spectacle. Next train Saturday morning. 3 days. 72 hours in a town where everyone now knew her as the woman who'd come uninvited, unwanted, the butt of a child's innocent scheme. Evelyn's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression smooth. "I'll find a room somewhere," she said. "I have a little money left." "No respectable boarding house will take you." This came from the woman in the expensive suit, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Not under these circumstances. A single woman claiming to be a mail-order bride to a man who never sent for her? It looks improper." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's cheeks burned, but she refused to look away. "Then I'll sleep at the station." "You will not." Caleb's voice cut across the murmuring crowd with unexpected force. He turned to face the gathered townspeople, his jaw set in a hard line. "This woman came here in good faith, believing what was written in a letter. The fault is mine for not watching my son more closely. But she's done nothing wrong, and she'll be treated with respect while she's in Red Springs." "Respect?" Someone snickered. "She's a—" "Choose your next word very carefully," Caleb interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Because whatever you say about her, you'll answer for to me." The man went silent. Others shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn stared at Caleb's broad back, stunned by the sudden protection from a man who just told her he didn't want her. "There's rooms above the dusty rows," a gravelly voice called out. Evelyn turned to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair and shrewd eyes. She wore a practical split skirt and carried herself with the authority of someone used to running things. "Clean enough. Private entrance. She can stay there till Saturday." "The Dusty Rose is a saloon," the expensive-suited woman said, scandalized. "You can't seriously suggest—" "I own it," the older woman said flatly, "and I'm offering. You got a better idea, Margaret?" Margaret had no response. The older woman stepped forward, extending a weathered hand to Evelyn. "Name's Ruth Cartwright. You look about done in, girl. Come on." Evelyn took the offered hand, grateful beyond words. But before she could step away, Luke's grip on her skirt tightened. "You're coming back, aren't you?" The boy's eyes were wide with barely contained fear. "You're not leaving right now?" Evelyn knelt down, bringing herself to his level. Up close, she could see the careful darning in his collar. The way his hair had been cut inexpertly, but with love. This was a child being raised by someone who cared but was overwhelmed, someone doing their best with insufficient resources and too little time. "I'll be in town for 3 days," she said gently. "If your father says it's all right, perhaps you could visit." "Pa?" Luke turned pleading eyes to his father. Caleb looked trapped, caught between protecting his son from attachment and not crushing the hope in the boy's face. He exhaled slowly. "We'll see." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Luke seemed to accept this as sufficient victory. He released Evelyn's skirt reluctantly, his small fingers uncurling one at a time. Evelyn stood, retrieving her carpet bag. Ruth Cartwright had already turned toward a building down the street, and Evelyn moved to follow. But she paused after a few steps, looking back at Caleb Rowan. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for speaking up. You didn't have to do that." Caleb's expression was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "Yes, I did." 3 words again. But these ones settled differently in Evelyn's chest, not like stones, but like seeds finding soil. The room above the Dusty Rose was small but clean, as Ruth had promised. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window that looked out over Red Springs Main Street. The sounds of the saloon below drifted up through the floorboards, piano music, laughter, the clink of glasses. But Ruth assured her the noise died down by midnight. "Most of my customers are working men," Ruth explained, setting a pitcher of water on the washstand. "They drink their wages on Saturday and spend the rest of the week recovering. You won't be bothered." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "I'll pay you." "We'll settle accounts Saturday before your train." Ruth waved away the offer. "Rest now. You look like you could sleep for a week." After Ruth left, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and finally let her composure crack. She didn't cry. Tears still seemed useless. But she let her shoulders sag, let the weight of the day press her down. She'd come so far, risked so much. And for what? A child's mistake and 3 days of waiting in a town that saw her as either foolish or fraudulent. She pulled the letter from her bag and read it again, though she'd memorized every word during the journey west. The handwriting was careful, painstaking. Now she understood why. Luke had labored over each letter, probably asking for help with spelling, doing his best to make his plea sound adult and official. Dear Miss Harper, I am looking for a woman of good character to join my household. I have a ranch and a son. Life is hard but honest. I can offer respect and a home. If you are willing, please come to Red Springs, New Mexico territory. I will meet the Saturday train. Caleb Rowan. Except it wasn't Caleb's name at all. It was Luke's Hope, written in careful letters, signed with his father's name because he didn't know his own carried any authority. Evelyn folded the letter and tucked it away. She should be angry, should feel tricked, used, humiliated, but all she could think of was that little boy's face when he'd said, "You came," as though her arrival was a prayer answered. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Evelyn washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into her other dress, and sat by the window watching Red Springs settle into evening. Lamps flickered to life in windows. Horses were led to stables. Somewhere, a dog barked. Normal life continuing around her disaster. A knock on her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Ruth holding a tray. "Figured you'd be hungry," Ruth said. "Stew and bread, nothing fancy." "It's perfect." Evelyn accepted the tray, her stomach suddenly reminding her she'd eaten nothing since dawn. "You're very kind," Ruth shrugged. "Town's got enough meanness without me adding to it. Besides," she paused, her shrewd eyes studying Evelyn. "I've known Caleb Rowan since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Good man, honest, but he's been drowning since his wife died and too stubborn to ask for help." "How long ago?" Evelyn asked quietly. 2 years come October. Fever took her fast, left him with a baby to raise and a ranch to run and no idea how to do both." Ruth leaned against the doorframe. "Luke's a good boy, smart, but he's been trying to parent himself while his father works dawn to dark, keeping them fed and housed. That's why he wrote the letter. Probably saw it as solving a problem." Ruth smiled sadly. "Children think in simple lines. Pa needs help. I need someone who stays. Therefore, acquire person who helps and stays." "But his father doesn't want that help." "His father doesn't know what he wants," Ruth corrected. "He's been surviving, not living. There's a difference." Evelyn absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "It doesn't matter. I'm leaving Saturday." "Maybe," Ruth straightened, preparing to leave. "But 3 days is longer than you think. Things have a way of shifting when you're not looking." After Ruth left, Evelyn ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple stew. Below, the saloon had come to life, music and voices blending into something almost festive. She should have felt out of place, a respectable woman lodging above a drinking establishment, but instead she felt oddly safe. Ruth ran a tight operation. No trouble would reach her here. She was preparing for bed when she noticed movement in the street below. A familiar figure stood in the shadows across from the saloon, hat pulled low. Caleb. He was just standing there, arms crossed, watching the building. Watching her window, she realized. Evelyn stepped back from the glass, her heart suddenly pounding. What was he doing? Ensuring she didn't run away before Saturday. Making sure no one bothered her. Or something else entirely, something he might not even understand himself? She watched him for long minutes. He never moved, never left his post. Just stood there in the darkness, a silent guardian for a woman he'd claimed not to want. Eventually, Evelyn drew the curtain and climbed into bed. But sleep came slowly, and when it finally arrived, her dreams were full of stormy gray eyes and small hands gripping her skirt, refusing to let go. Morning came with desert brilliance, the sun climbing fast and turning the air honey-thick with heat. Evelyn woke to the sounds of the town stirring, wagons creaking, voices calling, the rhythmic strike of a hammer somewhere close. She dressed carefully in her better dress, pinned her dark hair into a neat bun, and descended the exterior stairs to the street. Red Springs looked different in daylight, smaller perhaps, but more solid. The buildings were weathered but sturdy, built to withstand wind and heat and the slow erosion of time. People moved with purpose, going about their work without wasted motion. This was a practical place, she realized, a place that valued function over form. She'd planned to explore the town, perhaps find the mercantile and inquire about purchasing a few necessities, but she'd barely reached the street when she heard her name. Miss Harper. Luke stood a few feet away, alone and breathless, as though he'd run the whole distance from wherever he'd started. His hair stuck up in the same chaotic tufts as yesterday, and his shirt was buttoned wrong, the fabric pulling awkwardly across his thin chest. Luke, Evelyn glanced around. Where's your father? At the ranch. He had to check the herd. The boy edged closer. I came by myself. Does he know you're here? Luke's silence answered the question. Evelyn's stomach sank. She could already imagine the conversation when Caleb discovered his son had run off to town alone. Imagine the anger that would follow, anger she'd somehow be blamed for, as though her mere presence was corrupting his child. You need to go back, she said firmly. Your father will worry. He won't notice till noon. That's when he comes back for dinner. Luke's matter-of-fact tone suggested this was routine, this daily abandonment while his father worked. I wanted to show you something. Luke, please. The word came out desperate. Just come see. It won't take long. Evelyn hesitated, caught between responsibility and the pleading in the boy's eyes. She should send him home, should maintain proper distance. But he looked so hopeful, so certain that whatever he wanted to show her would somehow make things right. All right, she said quietly. But then you go straight back. Agreed? Agreed. Luke led her through town, his small hand occasionally reaching back to tug her forward when she lagged. People stared as they passed, more judgment, more whispers. But Evelyn held her head high and kept walking. Let them think what they wanted. She'd done nothing shameful. They stopped in front of a small building at the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the windows dusty, and a faded sign hung crooked above the door. But the structure itself was sound, the roof intact, the foundation solid. What is this place? Evelyn asked. It was a school, Luke said. Before Mrs. Patterson died, she taught all the children, but then she got old and went to live with her daughter in Santa Fe, and nobody came to replace her. Evelyn peered through a grimy window. Inside she could make out rows of empty desks, a dusty blackboard, shelves lined with forgotten books. A schoolhouse, abandoned and silent. Why did you bring me here? Luke turned to face her, his gray eyes serious beyond his years. Because you're a teacher. I'm not. In your letter, you said you worked in a textile mill, but before that you taught school, in Pennsylvania. You wrote about it. Evelyn's breath caught. She had mentioned it briefly, trying to present herself as educated and capable. She'd taught for 2 years before the mill paid better and necessity forced her hand. She'd loved it. The children, the books, the satisfaction of watching understanding bloom in young faces. That was a long time ago, she said softly. But you could do it again. Luke's voice carried absolute conviction. You could teach us. All the children. We don't have anyone. And Pa says education matters, but there's no money for a real teacher. And, Luke, Evelyn knelt down, taking his thin shoulders gently. I'm leaving in 3 days. Even if I wanted to stay, your father doesn't want me here. He will. The boy's certainty was unshakable. He just needs time to see. See what? That you're the answer. The words hit Evelyn squarely in the chest. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't anyone's answer, that his father had made his position clear. But looking into Luke's earnest face, she couldn't bring herself to crush that hope entirely. We should get you home, she said instead, standing and smoothing her skirts. Luke's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. They walked back through town in silence, the boy's earlier enthusiasm dimmed. When they reached the edge of Red Springs where the road stretched toward the Boxar Ranch, Evelyn stopped. Will you be all right from here? I know the way. Luke scuffed his bare foot in the dust. Miss Harper? Yes? I'm sorry my letter made trouble for you. The apology, so adult, so sincere, nearly broke her composure. You were trying to help your father. That's not something to apologize for. But you came all this way for nothing. Not nothing. Evelyn surprised herself with the truth of the statement. I saw new places, met new people. That counts for something. Luke studied her face as though memorizing it. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and wrapped his thin arms around her waist in a fierce hug. Evelyn stood frozen for a heartbeat before her arms came up automatically, returning the embrace. The boy felt fragile against her, all sharp edges and desperate need. When he pulled away, his eyes were suspiciously bright. But he didn't cry, just turned and started walking toward home, his small figure growing smaller with distance until the desert shimmer made him waver like a mirage. Evelyn watched until he disappeared entirely. Then she turned back toward town, her heart heavier than it had been that morning, carrying the weight of a child's hope she had no power to fulfill. The sun had climbed to its zenith by the time Evelyn made her way back to the dusty rows, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Sweat dampened the collar of her dress, and dust coated her boots in a fine layer that seemed to multiply with each step. She was reaching for the railing of the exterior stairs when hoofbeats thundered up the street. Caleb Rowan pulled his horse to a stop so abruptly the animal reared slightly, foam flecking its neck. He swung down from the saddle with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more hours mounted than on foot, his face dark with something that looked dangerously close to panic. "Where is he?" The words came out rough, almost accusatory. Evelyn's hand tightened on the railing. "He went home. I sent him back nearly an hour ago." "He wasn't there." Caleb took a step closer, and she could see the fear beneath the anger now, the white-knuckle terror of a parent who'd lost sight of their child. "I came back for noon meal, and he was gone. No note, nothing. Mrs. Chen said she saw him heading this way at dawn." "He wanted to show me the old schoolhouse," Evelyn said quietly. "He told me you wouldn't notice until noon, so I assumed he'd have time to get back before—" "You assumed," Caleb's jaw worked. "You let a 4-year-old child walk 3 miles alone through open country because you assumed." The accusation stung precisely because it was accurate. She should have walked him all the way home, should have insisted, should have done a dozen things differently. But she'd been trying to maintain distance, trying not to overstep boundaries that had been made painfully clear. "You're right," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I should have escorted him back properly. I'm sorry." The apology seemed to deflate some of his anger. He dragged a hand across his face, exhaustion bleeding through the cracks in his composure. "He knows the way. He's walked it before. But there's rattlesnakes this time of year. And the heat." His voice trailed off, imagination clearly filling in the gaps with every terrible possibility. Evelyn's stomach clenched with guilt and something else, a shared fear for a child she barely knew but somehow already cared about. "I'll help you look," she said, already moving toward his horse. "You'll stay here." The command came out flat and final. "You've done enough." The words landed like a slap. Evelyn stopped, her back straightening with wounded pride. "I'm trying to help." "Help would have been sending him straight home the moment you saw him." Caleb gathered his reins, preparing to mount. "Help would have been telling him no, instead of indulging whatever fantasy he's built in his head about you staying." "I did tell him no," Evelyn said, her voice shaking slightly. "I told him I'm leaving Saturday. I told him you don't want me here. He's the one who won't accept it. Because you keep giving him reasons to hope." Caleb's eyes were hard now, all the earlier complexity stripped away, leaving only a father's protective fury. "Every conversation, every kindness, every moment you spend with him, it's another thread he'll use to tie himself to you. And when you leave, it'll tear him apart." "Then what was I supposed to do?" The words burst out before Evelyn could contain them. "Ignore him completely? Treat him with cruelty to prove I'm not staying? He's a child who's lonely and grieving and trying to fix something he doesn't understand how to fix. I won't add to his pain just to make your life easier." The silence that followed was sharp-edged and dangerous. Caleb stared at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between anger and something that might have been respect if it weren't so thoroughly buried under fear. "Stay away from my son," he said finally, the words measured and deliberate. "Whatever he wants, whatever he asks for, the answer is no. Are we clear?" "Perfectly." Evelyn's voice had gone cold, a defense mechanism learned in childhood and perfected through years of disappointment. Caleb swung into the saddle and wheeled his horse around without another word. Evelyn watched him gallop back toward the ranch, dust rising in his wake, like accusation made visible. She stood there long after he'd disappeared, her hands clenched at her sides, throat tight with words she couldn't speak, and anger she had no right to feel. "That went well?" Ruth's dry voice came from the saloon doorway. Evelyn turned to find the older woman leaning against the frame, arms crossed, expression knowing. You were listening. Whole street was listening. Caleb's not exactly quiet when he's worked up. Ruth gestured toward the stairs. Come on, you look like you could use something stronger than water. The saloon was dim after the brutal sunlight, the air cooler and smelling of sawdust and whiskey. Ruth led Evelyn to a table in the back corner and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a bottle she kept behind the bar. I don't drink, Evelyn started. Today you do. Ruth pushed the glass across the scarred wood. Trust me, you've earned it. Evelyn took a small sip and immediately regretted it. The whiskey burned down her throat like liquid fire, making her eyes water. Ruth laughed, not unkindly, and took her own drink with practiced ease. Give it a minute. Second sip's easier. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the town drifting through the open door. Somewhere close, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil. A woman called to her children. Life continuing, indifferent to personal drama. He'll find the boy, Ruth said finally. Luke knows that country like he knows his own hand. Probably just stopped to watch a lizard or dig for arrowheads. Time gets away from children. Caleb thinks it's my fault. Caleb thinks everything's his fault, so he's got plenty of blame to spread around. Ruth swirled the liquid in her glass. He's scared, not thinking straight. When Luke turns up safe, and he will, Caleb will calm down. And still want me gone. Probably. Ruth's honesty was almost comforting in its bluntness. Man's been holding himself together with spit and stubbornness for 2 years. You showing up, Luke attaching himself to you, it threatens the fragile balance he's built. Can't blame him for wanting to protect it. I'm not threatening anything, Evelyn said quietly. I'm leaving in 3 days. Luke will forget about me in a week. Will he? Ruth's sharp eyes pinned her. Or will he spend the rest of his childhood remembering the woman who came because he asked, then left because his father sent her away? The truth of it settled heavy in Evelyn's chest. There was no good outcome here. Stay, and she'd be forcing herself on a man who'd made his position clear, living on charity and pity in a town that would never fully accept her. Leave, and she'd be abandoning a child who'd already lost too much, proving that adults couldn't be trusted, that reaching for help only brought more pain. What would you do? Evelyn asked. If you were me? Ruth was quiet for a long moment, considering. I'd remember that sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying or leaving, it's asking what you actually want, independent of everyone else's needs and fears. I want, Evelyn started, then stopped. What did she want? A home, certainly, security, purpose. But more than that, she wanted to matter. To be chosen, not just needed. To build something that couldn't be taken away by circumstance or misunderstanding. Before she could finish the thought, the saloon door burst open. Luke stood in the entrance, backlit by harsh sunlight, his small chest heaving with exertion. His face was streaked with tear tracks and dust, his eyes wild. Miss Harper. His voice cracked with desperation. You have to come. Pa's hurt. Evelyn was on her feet before conscious thought, the whiskey glass clattering forgotten on the table. Where? The old line shack, mile past the ranch house. Luke gulped air. He was riding hard, looking for me. Horse stepped in a prairie dog hole. Pa's leg. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Evelyn could imagine it. A horse going down at speed, a rider thrown, bones breaking against hard desert ground. Ruth was already moving, grabbing a leather satchel from behind the bar. Doc's out at the Morrison place delivering a baby. Won't be back till tomorrow at earliest. She thrust the bag at Evelyn. Basic supplies. Bandages, carbolic, laudanum. You know anything about setting bones? No. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. But I can follow instructions. Good enough. Ruth turned to the boy. Luke, get Mr. Patterson from the feed store. Tell him to bring his wagon and blankets, fast as he can. Luke nodded and bolted back into the sunlight. Ruth grabbed Evelyn's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me. Caleb's stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery when he's hurt. He'll tell you he's fine, that you should go back to town, that he doesn't need help. Ignore every word. You understand? Yes. And Evelyn? Ruth's expression softened slightly. Whatever he said earlier, Fear-talking. Remember that." Evelyn nodded, took the medical bag, and ran. The mile to the line shack felt eternal. Her dress tangled around her legs, her lungs burned with exertion, sweat soaked through her bodice. But she didn't slow. Couldn't. The image of Caleb lying broken in the desert pushed her forward with single-minded determination. Luke led the way with the unerring instinct of a child who'd grown up in this landscape. They cut across open ground, following paths invisible to Evelyn's Eastern-trained eyes. Lizards scattered at their approach. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals with lazy grace. The land felt vast and indifferent, beautiful and merciless in equal measure. She saw him before they reached the shack. A dark figure sprawled in the shadow of the small building, his horse standing a few yards away, reins trailing. Caleb lay on his back, one leg bent at an angle that made Evelyn's stomach lurch. His hat had fallen several feet away. His face was pale beneath the sun-darkened skin, jaw clenched against obvious pain. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, hands already reaching to assess the damage. Caleb's eyes snapped open at her touch, gray and unfocused with pain. "Luke?" The word came out rough. "I'm here, Pa." The boy appeared at Evelyn's elbow, his small face tight with fear. Caleb's gaze shifted to Evelyn, confusion flickering across his features. "What are you—" "Don't talk." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. She opened Ruth's medical bag, hands moving with purpose even as her mind raced. The leg was definitely broken. She could see the unnatural angle, the swelling already beginning beneath his dusty trousers. But was it a clean break or compound? Had he hit his head? Were there internal injuries she couldn't see? "Luke," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Caleb, "I need you to ride his horse back to the ranch. Get blankets, water, anything clean and soft you can carry. Can you do that?" "I can do it." The boy's voice was small but determined. "Good. Ride slow. Your father needs you to be safe more than he needs you to be fast." Luke hesitated, looking at his father's pale face. Caleb managed a slight nod, and the boy ran for the horse, scrambling into the saddle with more courage than grace. Once the sound of hoofbeats faded, Evelyn turned her full attention to Caleb. "I need to check your leg. It's going to hurt." "Already hurts." His words came through gritted teeth. "How bad?" "Broken." She carefully began cutting away the fabric of his trouser leg with a small knife from the medical bag, exposing the injury. The skin was unbroken, thank God for that small mercy, but the bone beneath had clearly snapped. "Can you feel your toes?" "Yes." "Can you move them?" A pause, then a barely perceptible nod. "Some." "Good." That meant the break hadn't severed anything critical. Evelyn pulled out the bottle of laudanum, measuring a careful dose. "This will help with the pain." "Say—" Caleb's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "No, makes me fuzzy. Need to stay clear." "You're about to have your leg set," Evelyn said firmly. "You don't need to be clear. You need to not go into shock from the pain." "Luke, we'll be fine. Mr. Patterson's bringing a wagon. Ruth's organizing help. Your son is safe and you're going to live. But only if you let me help you. Now take the medicine." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then slowly, his grip loosened. He accepted the laudanum, swallowing it with visible reluctance. Evelyn waited, watching his breathing, monitoring the color of his skin. The afternoon heat beat down mercilessly, but in the shadow of the line shack, the air held a fraction of coolness. "You were right," Caleb said suddenly, his voice slightly slurred as the medication took hold. "Earlier, about Luke. I was scared. I know. He's all I have left." The confession came out raw. His mother, she was the strong one, the one who knew how to love right. "I'm just trying not to break him." Evelyn's throat tightened. She arranged blankets she'd found inside the shack, creating padding for his injured leg. "You're not breaking him. You're keeping him fed and safe and teaching him right from wrong. That's not nothing. It's not enough. It's what you have." She met his eyes directly. "And it's more than a lot of children get." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "You defending me now, after I told you to stay away from him?" "I'm telling you the truth. There's a difference." The sound of wagon wheels rattling across hard ground saved her from having to say more. Mr. Patterson arrived with Luke perched beside him, the boy clutching an armful of blankets and a canteen. Behind them, two other men followed on horseback, neighbors, Evelyn assumed, summoned by Ruth's efficient network. What followed was a blur of controlled chaos. The men rigged a makeshift stretcher. Evelyn did her best to stabilize the leg before they moved him, using straight branches from the shack and strips of cloth to create a splint. Caleb bore it with stoic silence, though sweat poured down his face and his hands clenched white-knuckled on the stretcher edges. Luke refused to leave his father's side, his small hand gripping Caleb's sleeve as though physical contact alone could keep disaster at bay. Evelyn's heart ached watching them, this small, fierce family holding together by threads and willpower. The journey back to the ranch was agonizing. Every bump and rut sent visible shockwaves of pain through Caleb's body despite the laudanum. Evelyn walked alongside the wagon, one hand on Luke's shoulder, the other ready to steady the injured leg if needed. The sun continued its relentless descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and shadow. The Boxar ranch house was small but solid, weathered wood and a tin roof that gleamed in the fading light. A porch wrapped around two sides, sagging slightly but functional. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. Everything showed signs of hard use and deferred maintenance, the patina of a place where survival took precedence over aesthetics. They carried Caleb inside to a bedroom that smelled of dust and loneliness. The bed was neatly made, but the room held an abandoned quality, as though someone had stopped living in it and merely existed there instead. Evelyn helped settle him, arranging pillows, checking the splint, monitoring his breathing. "Doc will be here tomorrow," Mr. Patterson said from the doorway. "He'll set it proper. Till then, keep him still and keep that leg elevated." "I will." Evelyn spoke with more confidence than she felt. The neighbors departed with promises to check back in the morning, leaving Evelyn alone with a drugged, injured man and a terrified child in a house she had no business being in. Luke stood in the bedroom doorway, his small frame rigid with barely contained fear. "Is Pa going to die?" The question came out small and broken. "No." Evelyn knelt beside him, taking his thin shoulders gently. "The bone will heal. It'll take time, but he'll be fine." "Promise?" She wanted to give this child the absolute certainty he craved, but she'd learned early that false promises were cruelties dressed as kindness. "I promise I'll do everything I can to help him. That's all anyone can promise." Luke studied her face as though searching for lies, then slowly nodded. "Okay." "Have you eaten today?" Evelyn asked. The boy shook his head. "Then let's fix that. Your father needs rest and you need food. We'll check on him in a bit." The kitchen was sparse but functional. Evelyn found eggs, bread, some bacon that looked reasonably fresh. She cooked while Luke sat at the rough-hewn table, his eyes distant and haunted. When she placed food in front of him, he ate mechanically, as though his body understood the necessity, even if his mind was elsewhere. "Miss Harper?" His voice was barely audible. "Are you going to leave now that Pa's hurt?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Evelyn set down her own fork, considering her answer carefully. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. "But what I want doesn't matter. Pa said—" "Your father said those things when he was scared and angry." Evelyn chose her words with care. "Sometimes adults say things they don't entirely mean when they're feeling too much all at once." "But he doesn't want you here." "He doesn't know me. That's different from not wanting me." She reached across the table, covering the boy's small hand with her own. "Luke, I'm not going anywhere until your father is stable and the doctor has seen to him properly. After that, we'll see." It wasn't a promise, wasn't even a commitment, but it was honest, and that seemed to be enough. Luke's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and he returned to his meal with marginally more interest. They ate in silence as twilight deepened into full dark. Evelyn lit lamps, casting the small house in warm, amber light. The sounds of evening drifted through open windows, crickets singing, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the whisper of wind through sage. It should have felt strange playing house in a man's home without invitation or permission. Instead, it felt oddly natural, as though some part of her had been waiting for exactly this kind of quiet domesticity. After Luke finished eating, Evelyn checked on Caleb. He was sleeping, his breathing deep and regular, the lines of pain in his face softened by laudanum and exhaustion. She adjusted his blankets, checked the splint, left water within reach. Then she returned to the kitchen where Luke had slumped forward on the table, his head pillowed on his arms, already half asleep. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get you to bed." Luke's room was small and spare. A narrow bed, a wooden chest, a few treasured possessions arranged with care. A smooth river stone, a bird's nest, a carved horse that looked handmade, its lines simple but affectionate. Evelyn helped him change into a nightshirt, tucked him in, started to leave. "Will you stay?" Luke's voice was thick with approaching sleep. "Just till I'm asleep?" Evelyn hesitated, thinking of all the reasons she should maintain proper boundaries, should not encourage attachment. Then she looked at his small face, vulnerable in the lamplight, and all the logical arguments dissolved like sugar in water. "I'll stay," she said quietly. She sat on the edge of his bed and, without thinking, began to hum. An old song her own mother had sung, back when she'd been small enough to believe the world was kind. Luke's breathing gradually evened out, his small body relaxing into sleep. Evelyn watched him for a long moment, this child who'd reached across impossible distance with nothing but faith and careful letters, trying to fix what he didn't understand how to fix. When she finally stood to leave, she found Caleb watching from the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, his injured leg held stiffly. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear, clearer than they should have been given the laudanum dosage. "You should be in bed," Evelyn said quietly, moving toward him. Heard singing. His voice was rough with pain and something else. My wife used to sing to him, that same song. Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't know. No." Caleb shook his head slowly. "It was good. He needs that." They stood in the hallway, the lamp casting long shadows, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Caleb spoke again, the words coming slow and deliberate. "I'm sorry for earlier. You saved my life today, probably saved my leg, and I treated you like someone who threatened your child," Evelyn finished. "I understand." "Do you?" Caleb's eyes searched her face. "Because I'm not sure I do." The honesty in his voice surprised her. Evelyn gestured toward the bedroom. "You should rest. We can talk tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly." "Tomorrow Doc will set the bone and tell me to stay off it for weeks." Caleb's jaw tightened with frustration. "How am I supposed to run a ranch from a bed? The cattle need checking, fences need mending, there's a water pump that's been acting up." One problem at a time. Evelyn took his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Right now, the only problem is getting you back to bed before you fall down." She helped him hobble back to his room, steadied him as he lowered himself onto the mattress with visible effort. Sweat beaded his forehead, and his breathing came harsh with suppressed pain. Evelyn poured more laudanum, but he waved it away. "Already took enough. Any more, and I won't wake up if Luke needs me." "I'm here," Evelyn said. "If he needs anything, I'll handle it." "You're staying? Tonight? Unless you'd prefer I send for Ruth or one of the neighbors." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Stay," he said finally. "Please." The last word cost him something, pride perhaps, or the illusion of self-sufficiency he'd been maintaining through sheer stubbornness. Evelyn nodded, turning to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Harper? Thank you. For today. For all of it." She looked back at him, this proud, wounded man who'd built walls around himself and his son out of fear and love in equal measure. "You're welcome." Evelyn made herself a makeshift bed on the worn sofa in the front room, using blankets she found in a chest. The house settled around her with comfortable creaks and sighs, speaking its own language of age and use. Through the open window, the desert night breathed cool air scented with sage and dust and distance. She should have felt uncomfortable, alone in a strange man's house, her reputation hanging by an even thinner thread than before. Instead, she felt something close to peace. Here, in this small house with a sleeping child and injured man, she had purpose. She mattered. Not because someone had chosen her, but because she'd chosen to stay. Tomorrow would bring complications. The doctor's arrival, questions about propriety, decisions that needed making. But tonight, under the vast New Mexico sky, Evelyn Harper allowed herself to simply be present, to rest without worrying about the future, to let the day's events settle into her bones like dust after wind. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Another answered. The desert sang its ancient song, and Evelyn, for the first time since stepping off that train, felt like she might finally be finding her place in it. Dawn broke soft and golden across the desert, painting the horizon in shades of rose and copper. Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee, bitter and strong, and the sound of small feet padding across wooden floors. She sat up on the sofa, her back protesting the makeshift sleeping arrangement, and found Luke standing in the kitchen doorway wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt and an expression of fierce determination. "I made coffee," he announced, "like Pa showed me, for when he has to be up early." Evelyn rose and moved to the kitchen, where a battered pot sat on the stove, steam rising in gentle curls. She poured a cup and took a cautious sip. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and competently made, and she told him so. "You did well," she said, watching pride bloom across his small face. "Your father will appreciate it." "Is he awake yet?" "I'll check." Evelyn set down her cup and moved quietly to Caleb's room. He was awake, his eyes tracking her movement as she entered, his face drawn with pain that a night's rest hadn't eased. The splint remained secure, but the swelling had increased, his leg grotesquely misshapen beneath the bandages. "How do you feel?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Like a horse fell on me." His attempt at humor came out strained. "Doc here yet?" "It's barely past dawn. He'll come when he can." Evelyn approached the bed, her fingers moving to check his pulse. Strong and steady, if faster than ideal. "Luke made coffee. Would you like some?" That coffee could wake the dead, but Caleb's expression softened when he said it, the corner of his mouth lifting fractionally. "Boy means well." "He's worried about you." "I know." Caleb shifted slightly, then hissed with pain. "This is bad timing. Cattle need moving to summer pasture within the week. If I'm laid up, then we'll figure it out." The words were out before Evelyn could consider their presumption. She felt Caleb's gaze sharpen on her face. "We." The single word carried weight. Evelyn busied herself adjusting his pillows, avoiding direct eye contact. "Someone needs to manage things until you're mobile, unless you have other arrangements. My nearest neighbor's 10 miles west, and he's got his own operation to run." Caleb's voice held frustration, and something that might have been resignation. "Most of the work I can talk Luke through, but he's 4. Can't expect him to handle a full day's labor alone." "Then talk me through it." Evelyn met his eyes now, her expression calm despite the presumption of her offer. "I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. I know my way around livestock and hard work. Tell me what needs doing, and I'll do it." Caleb stared at her as though she'd spoken in tongues. "You're a mail-order bride who works in textile mills. What do you know about cattle ranching?" "I know animals need feeding and fences need mending, and life doesn't stop just because someone's injured." She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she recognized but couldn't quite suppress. "Unless you have a better solution?" The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken complications. Evelyn could see the war playing across Caleb's face, pride warring with practicality, suspicion battling necessity. Finally, he exhaled slowly, the sound carrying defeat and acceptance in equal measure. "There's 15 head in the near pasture that need checking. Water trough might be low after yesterday's heat. Luke can show you where." He paused, his jaw working as though the next words required physical effort. "If you're serious about helping, I'd be grateful." "I'm serious." "Even knowing I still can't give you what you came here expecting?" The question was blunt, almost harsh. "I'm not looking for a wife, Miss Harper. My boy's letter doesn't change that." Evelyn felt the words like a blade between her ribs, but she kept her expression steady. I'm not asking to be your wife. I'm offering to help someone who needs it. There's a difference. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. Before he could respond, Luke appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of steaming coffee with both hands, his face a study in concentration as he navigated the distance without spilling. "I brought you coffee, Pa." The boy's voice carried such earnest hope that Evelyn's throat tightened. Caleb's expression transformed, all the hardness melting away. "Thank you, son. Smells strong enough to raise the barn roof." Luke beamed, setting the cup carefully on the bedside table. "Miss Harper said I did good." "She's right." Caleb reached out and ruffled the boy's chaotic hair with obvious affection. "You're a good helper. Always have been." "Can I help Miss Harper with the cattle today?" Luke turned pleading eyes on his father. "I know where everything is. I can show her." Caleb hesitated, his gaze shifting between his son and Evelyn. She could see the calculation behind his eyes, weighing his child's safety against the reality of his own incapacity. "You stay close to Miss Harper at all times. You don't wander off. You don't try to do anything she doesn't specifically ask you to do. Understood?" "Yes, Pa." Luke's entire body vibrated with excitement. "And you?" Caleb's attention fixed on Evelyn, his voice dropping to something more serious. "He's all I have. If anything happened to him because I let you two go out there alone, nothing will happen to him," Evelyn interrupted, her voice firm. "You have my word." Caleb studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a rifle above the door. You know how to use one?" "I can manage." "Take it anyway. Rattlesnakes are active this time of year, and there's been cougar sign up in the rocks." He shifted again, grimacing with pain. "And Miss Harper? If you see any cattle that look sick or injured, don't try to handle it yourself. Just note the location and we'll figure it out when Doc gets here." Evelyn wanted to say more, to acknowledge the trust he was extending despite his reservations, but Luke was already pulling at her hand, eager to begin the day's adventure. She let herself be led outside into the cool morning air, the rifle a comfortable weight across her shoulders. The near pasture stretched across rolling terrain dotted with sage and scrub grass, the cattle scattered across the landscape like dark boulders. Luke kept up a steady stream of chatter as they walked, pointing out landmarks and sharing information with the unselfconscious enthusiasm of childhood. "That's the old oak tree where Ma used to bring picnics. See how it's got the bent branch? Pa says lightning did that before I was born, and over there's where I found an arrowhead once. Pa said it was probably from the Apache, from before they had to leave." His small hand tightened in hers. "Do you think they miss it? Their home?" The question caught Evelyn off guard with its depth. "I imagine they do. Everyone misses home when they're forced to leave it." "Like you?" Luke looked up at her with those serious gray eyes. "Do you miss Pennsylvania?" Evelyn considered this as they walked, her boots crunching on sun-hardened earth. "I miss some things, the green, the way rain smells different there. But I don't think I miss it the way you mean, because I'm not sure it was ever really home." "What makes a place home?" The question was so earnest, so genuinely curious, that Evelyn found herself answering with more honesty than she'd intended. "I think home is where you're chosen, where people want you there not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are." Luke absorbed this silently, his small brow furrowed with thought. Then, with the devastating simplicity of childhood, he said, "I want you here because of who you are." Evelyn's breath caught. She squeezed his hand gently, unable to trust her voice for a response. They walked on in companionable silence, the sun climbing higher, the day's heat beginning to build. The cattle were in reasonable condition. Caleb clearly took his work seriously despite being overwhelmed. Evelyn checked each animal with practiced efficiency, looking for signs of injury or illness, making mental notes of everything that needed attention. The water trough was indeed low, and she spent the better part of an hour working the hand pump while Luke collected eggs from the chicken coop and chattered about his father's plans for expanding the herd. By mid-morning, the sound of an approaching wagon drew them back toward the house. Doc Morrison arrived in a dusty surrey, his black bag worn smooth with years of use, his weathered face kind beneath a shock of white hair. Ruth Cartwright rode beside him, and behind them came 3 more wagons carrying what looked like half the town. "Heard Caleb took a fall," Doc said, climbing down with the stiffness of a man who'd spent the night delivering a difficult birth. "Thought I'd better bring reinforcements." The reinforcements turned out to be a collection of ranch wives bearing food, clean bandages, and the determined expressions of women who'd decided to take charge. They swept into the house with practiced efficiency, clucking over Caleb's condition, organizing supplies, transforming the sparse bachelor household into something that felt almost festive despite the circumstances. Evelyn found herself swept aside, suddenly unnecessary in the face of such competent invasion. She stood on the porch, watching through the window as the women worked, feeling oddly displaced. Ruth joined her, 2 cups of fresh coffee in hand. "Don't take it personal," Ruth said, handing over a cup. "They mean well, but a man getting hurt is an excuse for the women to gather, and they don't get many of those out here." "I'm glad they came." Evelyn meant it. "He needs proper care." "He needs more than that." Ruth's sharp eyes tracked the activity inside. "Man's been running himself ragged for 2 years. Neighbors have tried to help, but Caleb's got too much pride to accept charity. Maybe this'll force him to realize he can't do everything alone." Through the window, Evelyn could see Doc Morrison examining Caleb's leg with gentle competence, while 2 women stood by with supplies. Luke hovered in the doorway, his small face tight with worry, until one of the wives, a plump woman with kind eyes, pulled him aside and pressed a cookie into his hand. "They're good people," Ruth continued. "Caleb's respected here. His wife was well loved. When she died, the whole community grieved. But grief makes some people reach out and others pull back. Caleb pulled back. Can't blame him for that." "No, but you can worry about him." Ruth sipped her coffee. "And about the boy. Luke needs more than his father can give right now. Needs schooling, needs children his own age, needs a woman's influence. Everyone sees it except Caleb." "He sees it," Evelyn said quietly. "That's why Luke's letter frightened him so much. Because he knows his son needs something he can't provide, and accepting help feels like admitting failure." Ruth turned to study Evelyn's profile. "You see a lot for someone who's been here 3 days. Some things are universal." Evelyn finished her coffee, the bitter taste grounding her. "Pride and fear and love all mixed up until you can't tell which is which." Inside, Doc Morrison emerged from the bedroom, wiping his hands on a cloth. He spotted Evelyn through the window and gestured for her to come in. She entered to find Caleb propped against fresh pillows, his leg now encased in a proper plaster cast. His face was pale and slick with sweat, but his eyes were clear. "Clean break," Doc announced. "Set it proper, but he'll need to stay off it for 6 weeks minimum. No weight-bearing, no riding, no foolish heroics." He fixed Caleb with a stern look. "That means actually staying in bed, not dragging yourself around the house the moment my back's turned." 6 weeks. Caleb's voice was flat. "Doc, I can't." "You can, and you will, unless you want to spend the rest of your life with a limp." Doc's tone brooked no argument. "I've seen men try to rush recovery from breaks like this. Best case, they heal crooked. Worst case, they don't heal at all." The women had gathered in the bedroom doorway, listening with grave attention. One of them, a tall woman with steel gray hair and capable hands, stepped forward. "My husband and sons can handle the cattle move," she announced. "Patterson men know their way around livestock. We'll get your herd to summer pasture by week's end." "Margaret, I can't ask you to—" Caleb started. "You're not asking. We're telling." Margaret's voice held the authority of someone used to organizing entire communities. "And Sarah Chen's boy can handle your daily chores for the next month. He's 14 and strong as an ox." "We'll rotate meals," another woman added. "Each family takes a day. Keep you and the boy fed proper while you're laid up." Evelyn watched Caleb's face as the offers piled up, saw him struggle between gratitude and the stubborn independence that had carried him through 2 years of widowhood. Finally, his shoulders sagged in surrender. "I appreciate it," he said quietly, "more than I can say." The women beamed, pleased to have won, and dispersed to organize their efforts with military precision. Doc Morrison packed his bag, left instructions for wound care and pain management, and departed with promises to check back in a few days. Within an hour, the house had emptied again, leaving only Ruth, Evelyn, Luke, and Caleb in the sudden quiet. "Well," Ruth said, breaking the silence. That's sorted then. You're cared for, the ranch is handled, and you've got nothing to do but heal. She turned to Evelyn. Which means you're free to head back to town. Get ready for that Saturday train. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade suspended above a neck. Evelyn felt Luke's immediate tension, saw his small body go rigid. Caleb's expression closed off, becoming unreadable. Right, Evelyn said slowly. The train. Unless... Ruth's eyes glinted with something that might have been mischief. Unless there's a reason to stay. Community could use a school teacher. That old building's been sitting empty for near 2 years now. Children are growing up half-educated or not at all. Ruth, Caleb's voice held a warning. Just stating facts. Ruth held up her hands in mock innocence. Town council's been talking about finding someone to reopen the school. Can't pay much. Maybe enough for room and board if the teacher's reasonable. But it's honest work, and Lord knows these children need it. Evelyn's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She looked at Luke, whose eyes had gone wide with desperate hope. Looked at Caleb, whose face remained carefully neutral despite the tension in his jaw. Looked at Ruth, who was watching her with the sharp attention of someone who'd just moved a decisive chess piece. I'm not certified to teach in New Mexico territory, Evelyn said, even as part of her mind was already calculating possibilities. Territory's not picky about credentials, Ruth replied. Can you read and write and cipher? Can you keep order in a classroom? That's all we need. I taught for 2 years in Pennsylvania, primary grades. Good enough for Red Springs. Ruth stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Think about it. I'll talk to the council, see what kind of arrangement we can make. Meanwhile, I need to get back to the Dusty Rose before my afternoon customers drink all my profits. She departed in a swirl of practical efficiency, leaving Evelyn standing in the front room feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Luke had attached himself to her side, his small hand gripping her skirt with that familiar, fierce determination. You could stay, he whispered. You could teach school and live here and... Luke! Caleb's voice cut across his son's hopeful planning. Come here, please. The boy reluctantly released Evelyn's skirt and moved to his father's bedside. Caleb took his son's small hand in his own larger one, his expression gentle but firm. I know what you want, Caleb said quietly. But Miss Harper has her own life, her own plans. She came here expecting one thing and found something completely different. We can't ask her to change everything just because we need help. But she wants to stay. Luke's voice trembled. I can tell. Wanting and doing are different things. Caleb's eyes lifted to meet Evelyn's across the room. And sometimes what we want isn't what's best. The words felt directed at her as much as at his son. Evelyn understood what he was doing, trying to protect Luke from disappointment, trying to keep his own boundaries clear, trying to prevent the complications that would arise from her staying. It was reasonable, practical, the right thing to do. But standing there in that small house, with afternoon light streaming through clean windows and a child looking at her with such naked hope, Evelyn found herself tired of reasonable. Tired of practical, tired of always choosing the safe path that led nowhere she actually wanted to go. What if I wanted to stay for myself? The words came out quietly, but clearly. Not because you need help or because Luke wants it, but because this is the first place I've been in years that felt like it might become home? Caleb's expression flickered with surprise. You don't know anything about this place, about the life here. It's hard, Miss Harper. Hot in summer, cold in winter. Isolated most of the year. Town's barely big enough to call itself that. Nearest city's 2 days by train. It's not Pennsylvania. No, it's not. Evelyn moved closer, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them steady. Pennsylvania was working 12-hour shifts in a textile mill, sharing a room with 2 other women, saving every penny for a future that never seemed to arrive. Here, I could teach, could do work that matters, could build something of my own. Teaching pays almost nothing. I don't need much. You'd be alone. A single woman in a small town. People talk. People have been talking since I stepped off that train. Evelyn's voice carried an edge now. I survived their judgment then. I can survive it now. Caleb stared at her, and she could see him struggling with arguments he couldn't quite articulate. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. Why would you do this? Really? Evelyn took a breath, searching for words that would convey truth without revealing too much of the desperate hope building in her chest. Because for the first time in my life, I have a choice. Not just reacting to circumstances or taking whatever's offered, but actually choosing what I want to do with my days. And if I'm choosing, I choose to stay. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Luke looked between the adults, hardly daring to breathe. Caleb's jaw worked as though chewing on responses he couldn't quite swallow. "If you stay," he said finally, "it's not because of any obligation to me or Luke. It's not charity or pity or trying to fix something that can't be fixed. It's because you genuinely want this life. You understand that?" "I understand." And when you realize how hard it is, when winter comes and the wind cuts through these walls and you're teaching children who can barely afford paper for their lessons, you don't get to blame us for not warning you. "I won't." Caleb exhaled slowly, and Evelyn watched something in him shift. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. "Then I suppose you should talk to Ruth about the council meeting, and the schoolhouse will need work before it's fit for teaching. Roof probably leaks, floor needs repair. I can handle it." Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. "I'm good with hard work, remember?" Luke made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob of relief. He launched himself at Evelyn, wrapping thin arms around her waist, with enough force to make her stagger. She steadied herself and returned the embrace, feeling the boy's racing heartbeat against her ribs. "You're staying," he said into her dress, his voice muffled but jubilant. "You're really staying." "I'm staying," Evelyn confirmed, the words settling into her bones with surprising certainty. Over Luke's head, her eyes met Caleb's. His expression was complicated. Relief and worry, and something else she couldn't quite name. Not welcome exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. A grudging acknowledgement that sometimes the help you needed arrived in unexpected packages, carrying letters you never sent. The afternoon stretched into evening, measured in small tasks and quiet conversations. Evelyn prepared a simple supper while Luke alternated between helping and getting underfoot in the way of excited children everywhere. Caleb dozed fitfully, the laudanum and his body's need for healing pulling him under, despite his obvious desire to stay alert. After the dishes were washed and Luke had been persuaded into bed, Evelyn found herself once again on the front porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert night was different from Pennsylvania nights, bigger somehow, the stars brighter and more numerous, the darkness itself carrying a quality of vastness that made her feel simultaneously insignificant and strangely free. She heard movement behind her and turned to find Caleb in the doorway, leaning heavily on a crutch that one of the neighbors must have left. His face was tight with pain and determination, his jaw set in a stubborn line. "You should be in bed," Evelyn said. "Got tired of staring at the ceiling." He hobbled forward, lowering himself carefully into one of the weathered porch chairs. "Figured I'd stare at the sky instead." Evelyn resumed her seat, and they sat in silence for a moment. The night sounds of the desert rose around them. Crickets, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through sage. It should have been awkward, this quiet companionship between strangers bound together by circumstance. Instead, it felt oddly peaceful. "My wife loved nights like this," Caleb said suddenly. "Used to sit right here and name constellations. She knew all the stories behind them, Greek myths mostly. She was educated, came from back east like you." He paused. "She died thinking I couldn't manage without her. Probably would have been right, except Luke needed me to figure it out." Evelyn listened without interrupting, sensing that these words had been locked inside for too long, that they needed release more than they needed response. "For 2 years I've been telling myself I just needed to get through each day. Feed the boy, work the ranch, don't think too far ahead. And then Luke sends for a mail-order bride, and suddenly I can't ignore the fact that we're not surviving, we're just existing." Caleb's voice roughened. "You staying, it scares me, Miss Harper, because it means admitting I need help, means things changing when I've built my whole life around keeping things the same." "Change isn't always bad," Evelyn said quietly. "No, but it's always hard." He turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in the dim light. "I can't give you what you came here expecting. I'm not looking for romance or companionship or any of the things a woman might reasonably want. I've got nothing to offer except a town that needs a teacher and a boy who's already too attached to you. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to build a life here. Evelyn met his eyes directly. What that life looks like, whether it's just teaching or something more. We'll figure out as we go. But I'm not expecting grand gestures or promises you can't keep. I'm expecting honesty and respect and room to make my own choices. Can you give me that? Caleb studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing her words, testing them for truth. Finally, he nodded slowly. I can try. Then that's enough. Evelyn stood, preparing to return inside. You should rest. Tomorrow the council will likely want to meet, and there's work to be done on the schoolhouse before it's fit for students. Miss Harper? Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. For today. For staying. For everything. Evelyn smiled, a genuine expression that felt unfamiliar after days of careful control. You're welcome, Mr. Rowan. Caleb, he corrected, if you're staying, might as well use my given name. Evelyn, she replied, and yes, I'm staying. She left him sitting on the porch, a solitary figure outlined against the star-filled sky, and made her way to the sofa that had become her temporary bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new reasons to question her decision. But tonight, curled beneath borrowed blankets in a house that smelled of coffee and honest labor, Evelyn Harper allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Pure and simple and terrifying in its intensity. Hope that she'd finally found the place where she could stop running and start building. Where her choices mattered and her presence was wanted, not just tolerated. Where a small boy's faith in a proud man's reluctant acceptance might somehow transform into something worth staying for. Outside, a coyote called to the moon. Inside, Evelyn closed her eyes and let sleep take her, already dreaming of classrooms filled with children and a future she was choosing for herself, one difficult day at a time. The town council met 3 days later in the back room of Patterson's feed store, a space that smelled of grain dust and leather and the particular mustiness of documents kept in dry storage. 7 men and 2 women sat around a scarred oak table, their faces weathered by sun and hardship, their expressions ranging from skeptical to cautiously hopeful as Evelyn stood before them. Ruth had accompanied her, lending silent support and occasional interjection when the questions grew too pointed. Margaret Patterson sat at the head of the table, her steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her capable hands folded on the table surface as she studied Evelyn with shrewd assessment. You understand the position pays $40 a month, Margaret said, her voice carrying the flat practicality of someone used to managing budgets. That includes use of the teachers' quarters above the schoolhouse once they're made habitable. No funds for supplies beyond what we can scrape together from families. You'll be teaching children aged 5 to 14, all grades in one room. I understand, Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. And you're aware this is a 3-month trial period? This came from a thin man with suspicious eyes. If the children don't learn or the families complain, we'll need to find someone else come fall. That seems fair. What about your reputation? The man leaned forward, his tone sharpening. You came here as a mail-order bride to a man who never sent for you. Some folks might say that raises questions about your judgment. The room went silent. Evelyn felt heat climb her neck, but refused to look away. I came here in good faith based on a letter I believed to be genuine. The circumstances were unfortunate, but I acted with honor throughout. If anyone in this town questions that, they're welcome to speak to me directly. Now hold on, Frank, Ruth interjected. The girl's done nothing wrong except trust a child's innocent scheme. You want to punish her for kindness? I want to make sure we're not putting someone of questionable character in charge of our children's education. Frank crossed his arms. We've got standards to maintain. Standards? Margaret's voice cut across the rising tension like a blade. Frank, your oldest boy is 11 and can barely write his own name because we haven't had a teacher for 2 years. My grandchildren are growing up without proper schooling. Half the children in this town will end up illiterate if we don't do something soon. So unless you've got another qualified candidate hiding in your back pocket, I suggest we stop worrying about gossip and start worrying about education. Frank subsided, muttering, but didn't argue further. Margaret turned her attention back to Evelyn, her expression softening fractionally. Miss Harper, I won't pretend this will be easy. The schoolhouse needs substantial repair. Some families can't afford to send their children regular-like, especially during planting and harvest. You'll be working with students at vastly different levels, some of whom have never seen the inside of a classroom. Are you prepared for that reality? Evelyn thought of the textile mill, of 12-hour shifts and wages that barely covered rent, of a future that stretched ahead like an endless corridor with no doors. Then she thought of Luke's face when he'd shown her the abandoned schoolhouse, of the hope in his voice when he'd said she could teach them. "I'm prepared," she said firmly. "I won't promise perfection, but I can promise dedication. These children deserve someone who cares about their education, and I do. I'll work as hard as necessary to give them that." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then looked around the table. "All in favor of hiring Miss Harper as Red Springs school teacher on a 3-month trial basis?" 7 hands rose. Frank's remained on the table, but he didn't vote against. Margaret nodded, something that might have been approval flickering across her stern features. "Then it's settled. You start Monday week, which gives you time to get the schoolhouse in order. We'll arrange work parties to help with repairs. Welcome to Red Springs, Miss Harper. Try not to make us regret this." The meeting dispersed with handshakes and murmured congratulations. As Evelyn stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine, Ruth squeezed her arm with genuine warmth. "You did well in there. Margaret doesn't approve easily, but I saw her face. You won her over." "What about Frank?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Frank's suspicious of everyone who wasn't born within spitting distance of Red Springs. Don't take it personal." Ruth glanced up the street toward where the schoolhouse stood in disrepair. "You've got your work cut out for you. That building's been neglected something fierce." "I can handle it." "I know you can." Ruth's eyes held a knowing glint. "Question is, can Caleb handle you staying? Man's been circling that particular truth like a horse eyeing a snake." Evelyn felt heat climb her cheeks. "He's accepted it." "Accepted isn't the same as comfortable with." Ruth started walking, and Evelyn fell into step beside her. "Caleb Rowan's a good man, but he's been living in a holding pattern since his wife died. You being here, actually staying instead of just passing through, it forces him to acknowledge that life keeps moving whether he's ready or not." "I'm not trying to replace his wife." "Didn't say you were, but you're definitely complicating his carefully maintained status quo." Ruth paused at the corner where their paths would diverge. "Just be patient with him, and with yourself. Nothing worth building gets built overnight." The walk back to the Box R took Evelyn through the heart of Red Springs, such as it was. She passed the mercantile where Mrs. Chen waved from the window, the blacksmith shop where sparks flew like tiny stars, the small church with its whitewashed walls and modest bell tower. People nodded as she passed, some with warmth, others with reserve, all with curiosity. She was becoming part of the town's fabric, she realized. No longer just the mail-order bride who'd been rejected, but Evelyn Harper, the new schoolteacher. The shift felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. At the ranch, she found Luke in the yard attempting to milk an extremely uncooperative goat. The animal bleated indignantly, and the boy's face was scrunched with concentration as he wrestled with the bucket and the goat's general lack of cooperation. "Need help?" Evelyn asked, biting back a smile. Luke looked up, relief flooding his features. "She won't hold still. Pa usually does this, but he can't get down here with his leg, and the milk's got to be gotten or she'll dry up, and show me what your father taught you." Together they managed to extract a reasonable amount of milk, though not without considerable protest from the goat. Luke's hands were small but surprisingly capable, and Evelyn found herself impressed by how much responsibility he'd shouldered at such a young age. "Did the council say yes?" Luke asked as they carried the milk bucket toward the house. "About you teaching?" "They did. I start Monday week." The boy's whoop of joy startled the chickens into a flurry of indignant clucking. He set down his end of the bucket and threw his arms around Evelyn's waist in an exuberant hug. "I knew they would. I knew it." His voice was muffled against her dress. "Now you'll really stay, forever and ever." Evelyn's throat tightened at the certainty in his voice. She knelt down, bringing herself to his level, her hands gentle on his thin shoulders. "Luke, I'll stay as long as I can, but forever is a long time, and life has a way of changing when we don't expect it. I need you to understand that." "But you won't leave like Ma did." The question came out small and frightened. "You won't just Stop being here? The grief in his voice broke something in Evelyn's chest. She pulled him close, feeling his small body tremble with barely contained emotion. I'm not going anywhere by choice, she said firmly. Your mother didn't leave because she wanted to. Sometimes things happen that are beyond anyone's control. But I promise you, as long as I have a say in the matter, I'll be here. Luke clung to her for a long moment before pulling back, swiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Pa says promises are serious, that you shouldn't make them unless you mean them all the way through. Your father's right, and I mean this one all the way through. They carried the milk inside to find Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, his casted leg propped on a chair, a ledger open before him. He looked up as they entered, his expression softening when he saw his son's face. Goat give you trouble? Miss Evelyn helped. Luke set the bucket on the counter with careful pride. And guess what? The council said yes, she's going to be our teacher. Caleb's gaze shifted to Evelyn, something complicated moving behind his eyes. That's so. Start Monday week, 3-month trial period. Evelyn busied herself straining the milk, avoiding direct eye contact. The schoolhouse needs work first. Margaret mentioned organizing repair parties. I'll send word to the neighbors. We can have it fixed up in a few days if enough hands show. Caleb paused, then added quietly, Congratulations. It's good work you'll be doing. The simple words carried more weight than their surface meaning. Evelyn recognized them for what they were, an acknowledgement, perhaps even an acceptance. Not of her presence in his life necessarily, but of her right to build a life here independent of him. Thank you, she said, meeting his eyes briefly. I appreciate that. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. True to Caleb's word, neighbors arrived at dawn on Saturday with tools and materials and the kind of organized efficiency that came from communities used to helping each other survive. The schoolhouse became a hive of purposeful chaos. Men repaired the roof, replaced rotten floorboards, reinforced the foundation. Women scrubbed windows until they gleamed, beat dust from forgotten textbooks, sewed curtains from donated fabric. Children ran messages and fetched supplies and generally got underfoot with the enthusiasm of youth. Evelyn worked alongside them, her hands blistering from unfamiliar labor, her back aching from hours of scrubbing and lifting and organizing. But with each hour of work, the building transformed. The dusty tomb became a place of potential, its bones solid, its purpose restored. Luke appointed himself her personal assistant, following her everywhere with tools and questions and endless commentary. He showed her where Mrs. Patterson used to keep the chalk, how the old stove worked, which desk had been his mother's when she'd attended school there as a girl. Ma used to tell me about learning her letters, Luke said, running his small hand over the carved surface of a weathered desk. She said education was the most important thing anyone could give a child, more important than land or money or anything you could hold in your hands. Your mother was a wise woman. Pa says I have her mind. Pride and sadness mingled in the boy's voice. Says she was the smartest person he ever knew, and I should honor her by learning everything I can. Evelyn knelt beside him, studying the faint initials carved into the wood. Then that's what we'll do. We'll learn everything we can, and we'll make her proud. By Sunday afternoon, the schoolhouse was ready. Fresh paint gleamed on the walls, new glass sparkled in the windows. The wood stove stood clean and functional. Desks had been arranged in neat rows, a blackboard hung on the front wall, and shelves held a modest collection of books donated from various households. Evelyn stood in the doorway as the last of the workers departed, overwhelmed by what had been accomplished in such a short time. This was community, she realized. This was what it meant to belong somewhere, not just being present, but being woven into the fabric of mutual support and shared purpose. Looks good, Caleb's voice came from behind her. He'd insisted on coming despite his injury, supervising from a chair on the porch while Luke ran messages. Now he stood leaning heavily on his crutch, his face tired but satisfied. Better than it's looked in years. They did beautiful work. Evelyn couldn't keep the emotion from her voice. Everyone did. They did it for the children and for you. Caleb's gaze moved across the transformed space. You've already made a difference here, Evelyn. People see that. The use of her given name sent a small shock through her system. It was the first time he'd used it unprompted, and the intimacy of it felt significant somehow. I haven't done anything yet except accept help, she said. You stayed. In a place like this, that means something. He shifted his weight, grimacing with discomfort. Most people who come out here looking for something better take one look at the reality and catch the next train east. You looked at the reality and decided it was worth the work. Evelyn turned to face him fully, studying his weathered features in the golden afternoon light. Are you glad I stayed? Honestly? The question hung between them, too large and complicated for simple answer. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though chewing on words he wasn't sure he should speak. I don't know yet, he said finally, his honesty almost brutal in its directness. Part of me is grateful. You've been good for Luke, good for this community. But part of me is still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to get complicated in ways I'm not prepared to handle. What complications are you expecting? I don't know. That's what scares me. He met her eyes directly. You're not just passing through anymore. You're building a life here, which means eventually we're going to have to figure out what that means for all of us. Before Evelyn could respond, Luke came running up the path, his face flushed with exertion and excitement. Miss Evelyn, come quick! There's a man at the house asking for you. Evelyn's stomach clenched with sudden apprehension. What kind of man? Fancy clothes. Big horse. He says he's from Pennsylvania, and he has papers about you. Caleb's expression darkened immediately. He exchanged a quick glance with Evelyn, then gestured toward the ranch house. Let's go see what this is about. They made their way back with Luke running ahead, his excitement dimmed by confusion at the adult's tension. As they approached the house, Evelyn saw the man Luke had described, tall, well-dressed in an Eastern-cut suit, standing beside a fine bay horse. He turned as they approached, his eyes fixing on Evelyn with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Miss Evelyn Harper? His voice was cultured, educated, carrying the accent of Philadelphia's better neighborhoods. I'm Evelyn Harper. My name is Richard Morrison. I represent the estate of your late uncle, Thaddeus Harper. He withdrew papers from an inner pocket. I've been searching for you for some time. You're a difficult woman to locate. Evelyn's mind raced. Uncle Thaddeus had been her father's older brother, a wealthy merchant she'd met perhaps 3 times in her life. They'd had no relationship to speak of. He'd disapproved of her father's choices, cut contact decades ago. My uncle died? 6 months ago. He left no children, no surviving siblings. His will names you as his sole heir. Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral. You've inherited a considerable estate, Miss Harper. Property, investments, assets totaling approximately $40,000. The number was so absurd, so impossibly large, that Evelyn couldn't process it. $40,000. More money than she could imagine. More than she'd earn in a lifetime of teaching. That can't be right. I assure you it is. However, there are conditions. Morrison's tone sharpened. Your uncle's will stipulates that you must return to Pennsylvania to claim the inheritance. You must establish residence in Philadelphia, manage the estate personally, and conduct yourself in a manner befitting the Harper name. The will further specifies that should you refuse these conditions or fail to return within 60 days of notification, the entire estate passes to charitable organizations. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Beside her, Caleb had gone very still, his knuckles white on his crutch. Luke pressed against her side, his small hand finding hers. Why would he do this? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We weren't close. He never acknowledged my existence. I cannot speak to your uncle's motivations. I can only present the terms of his will. Morrison's expression softened fractionally. Miss Harper, this is a life-changing opportunity. Financial security, social position, a respected name. Surely you can see that's worth returning for. I have a position here. I've committed to teaching. Teaching in a frontier schoolhouse for $40 a month. Morrison's tone made it clear what he thought of that choice. Forgive me, but that hardly compares to inheriting a fortune. You'd never have to work again, never have to struggle or scrape by. You'd have everything a woman could want. Would I? Evelyn's voice had gone cold. Or would I have what my uncle wanted for me? A respectable life in a respectable city, conducted according to rules I had no hand in making? Miss Harper, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm questioning whether money is worth giving up everything I've chosen for myself. She straightened her shoulders, feeling Caleb's silent presence beside her, Luke's hand tight in hers. How long do I have to decide? The will allows 60 days from notification. You have approximately 8 weeks to present yourself in Philadelphia and accept the terms. Morrison tucked the papers away. I strongly advise you to consider carefully. Opportunities like this don't come twice. He mounted his horse and departed without further conversation, leaving dust and disruption in his wake. The three of them stood in silence, watching him disappear down the road. $40,000, Caleb said finally, his voice carefully neutral. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. I know. You'd be set for life. Comfortable. Safe. I know that too. Evelyn turned to face him. Is that what you want? For me to go? Caleb's expression was unreadable. What I want doesn't matter. This is your decision, your life. I've got no claim on either. Don't you? The words burst out before Evelyn could stop them. I stayed here because of Luke's letter, because of a promise I made to teach, because this place felt like somewhere I could finally build something that mattered. If I leave now, I'm breaking that promise. I'm proving everyone who doubted me right. I'm abandoning children who need education and a boy who's already lost too much. And if you stay, you're walking away from financial security most people would kill for. Caleb's voice remained frustratingly even. You've known us less than 2 weeks, Evelyn. You can't be expected to choose poverty and hardship over wealth because of a promise made in ignorance of better options. So you do want me to go. I want you to make the choice that's right for you, not for us. Caleb's mask slipped slightly, showing strain beneath. But I'd be lying if I said I wanted you to stay out of obligation. That's not fair to anyone. Luke had been silent through this exchange, his small body rigid with tension. Now he looked up at Evelyn, his gray eyes swimming with tears he refused to shed. Are you leaving? The question came out small and broken. Evelyn knelt down, taking his face gently in her hands. I don't know yet, Luke. This is complicated, and I need time to think about what's right. But you promised. His voice cracked. You said you'd stay all the way through. I know what I said, and I meant it, but sometimes life gives us choices we weren't expecting, and we have to figure out what the right thing is even when there's no clear answer. The right thing is staying. Luke's certainty was absolute. You belong here, with us. Evelyn pulled him close, fighting back her own tears. Over his head, she met Caleb's eyes and saw her own turmoil reflected there. He looked away first, jaw tight, shoulders carrying weight that wasn't his to bear, but that he couldn't seem to set down. I need some time, Evelyn said quietly, to think, to figure this out. Take all the time you need. Caleb's voice was rough. School doesn't start till Monday. You've got days yet before you need to decide. But they both knew that wasn't true. The decision felt immediate, urgent, pressing down with the weight of futures branching in opposite directions. Stay and honor her commitments, but live always wondering what she'd given up. Go and claim security, but carry the guilt of promises broken and hearts wounded. That night, Evelyn lay on her makeshift bed, unable to sleep, watching shadows play across the ceiling as her mind circled endlessly. $40,000. A fortune. Security. Everything she'd worked for her entire adult life suddenly handed to her by a man who'd never cared whether she lived or died. But against that wealth, she weighed Luke's small hand in hers, the satisfaction of the transformed schoolhouse, the beginning of belonging she'd felt in Red Springs. She weighed Caleb's cautious acceptance and the possibility of something more, given time. She weighed the choice between a life handed to her and a life she built with her own hands. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the roof like questions without answers. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself back in Philadelphia, dressed in fine clothes, managing her uncle's estate, living in respectable comfort. The image wouldn't come into focus. But when she imagined herself in the schoolhouse on Monday morning, children filling the desks, Luke in the front row with his careful handwriting, the future felt clear as glass. She knew then what her answer would be, knew it with a certainty that settled in her bones like truth. The knowing didn't make it easier, didn't erase the magnitude of what she'd be walking away from. But it made the path forward visible, and sometimes that was all anyone could ask for. Morning came with the clean smell of rain-washed earth and the pale light of dawn filtering through scrubbed windows. Evelyn rose before anyone else, dressed carefully, and walked the mile into Red Springs with her decision settled like a stone in her chest, heavy but solid. She found Richard Morrison at the boarding house, finishing breakfast with the careful precision of a man unused to frontier accommodations. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his features before professional composure reasserted itself. "Miss Harper, I didn't expect to hear from you quite so soon. I've made my decision." Evelyn remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them steady. "Please convey my gratitude to the estate executors, but I'm declining the inheritance." Morrison set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "You're declining $40,000. "I am."
"May I ask why?" His tone suggested he genuinely couldn't fathom the reasoning. "This is life-changing money, Miss Harper, security beyond anything you could achieve on your own." "It's also a life I didn't choose and don't want." Evelyn's voice was calm, certain. "My uncle spent his life building something that mattered to him. I respect that. But I'm not interested in inheriting his vision for my future. I'd rather build my own, even if it's smaller and harder and worth less in dollars." Morrison studied her for a long moment, his expression caught between respect and disbelief. "You understand this decision is final? Once you decline, there's no reclaiming the inheritance?" "I understand completely." "And you're absolutely certain? No doubts? No second thoughts?" Evelyn thought of Luke's face when he'd asked if she was leaving, of the schoolhouse waiting to be filled with children's voices, of Caleb's careful distance and the possibility of something more beneath it. She thought of the life she could build here with her own hands and her own choices, and the certainty only deepened. "No doubts," she said firmly. "Please proceed with distributing the estate to the charities my uncle specified. I'm sure they'll put it to better use than I would." Morrison gathered his papers with the resigned efficiency of a man who'd done his duty and could do no more. "Very well. I'll need your signature confirming your decision, and then my business here is concluded." The paperwork took less than 10 minutes. Evelyn signed her name in careful script, watched Morrison witness and seal the documents, and felt a weight she hadn't known she was carrying lift from her shoulders. When it was done, Morrison stood and extended his hand. "I think you're making a mistake, Miss Harper, but I admire your conviction." His handshake was firm, respectful. "I hope this frontier life you've chosen proves worth the sacrifice." "It already has," Evelyn said quietly. She walked back to the Box R with the sun climbing higher, burning off the last of the morning coolness. The desert stretched around her in all directions, vast and unforgiving and beautiful in its harsh simplicity. This was her home now, by choice rather than circumstance, and the knowing of it filled her with something close to joy. At the ranch, she found Caleb on the porch, his casted leg propped up, watching Luke attempt to repair a section of fence rail with more enthusiasm than skill. Both looked up as she approached, their faces carrying identical expressions of guarded hope. "You went to town," Caleb observed, his voice carefully neutral. "I did. Had business with Mr. Morrison." Evelyn climbed the porch steps, standing where she could see both their faces clearly. "I declined the inheritance. Signed papers this morning, making it official." The silence that followed was absolute. Luke's mouth fell open in shock. Caleb went very still, his eyes searching her face as though looking for regret or second thoughts. "You turned down $40,000, Caleb said slowly, as though testing the reality of the words. "I did." "Why?" The question came from Luke, his small voice filled with wonder and confusion. "That's enough money to buy everything. You could have fancy dresses and a big house and never have to work again." Evelyn knelt down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Because fancy dresses and big houses aren't what make a life worth living. People do. Purpose does. Belonging somewhere because you chose it, not because circumstance forced you there." She smiled, watching understanding dawn in his gray eyes. "I promised I'd stay all the way through. That promise matters more than money ever could." Luke launched himself at her with enough force to nearly knock her over, his thin arms wrapping around her neck with fierce joy. "You stayed. You really stayed. I really stayed. Evelyn held him close, feeling his heart racing against her ribs. Now I believe you have a fence to fix before it falls down completely. The boy pulled back, grinning, and returned to his work with renewed energy. Evelyn straightened and found Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complicated. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Give up that kind of money for a teaching position that pays barely enough to live on. I didn't do it for the teaching position. Evelyn moved to lean against the porch rail, close enough to speak privately, but maintaining careful distance. I did it because, for the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine. Not inherited, not handed to me, not determined by someone else's expectations. Mine. Still, Caleb's jaw worked as though chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. That's a hell of a sacrifice. Is it? Evelyn met his eyes directly. Or is it just recognizing that some things matter more than money? Luke matters. These children who need education matter. Building a life I actually want to live matters. What's the point of financial security if you're miserable in the having of it? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice carried a roughness that suggested emotion held carefully in check. My wife used to say something similar, that the richest people weren't the ones with the most money, but the ones who loved what they'd built. He turned to look at Evelyn, and she saw vulnerability there beneath the protective layers. I've been thinking about that a lot these past few days, about what it means to actually live instead of just survive. And what have you concluded? That maybe I've been surviving for too long. The admission seemed to cost him something. That maybe Luke's letter wasn't just a child's scheme, but something I needed without knowing how to ask for it. Evelyn's breath caught. Caleb, let me finish. He shifted his weight, grimacing with discomfort but not looking away. When you first arrived, I was terrified. Of change, of complication, of letting anyone close enough to be lost again. I told myself I was protecting Luke, but I was really protecting myself. And then you stayed anyway, despite having every reason to leave, and I realized I was being a coward. You're not a coward. You're a man who's been through hell and came out the other side still standing. Standing, maybe, but not living, not really. Caleb's voice dropped to something almost confessional. These past 2 weeks, watching you with Luke, seeing the way you fit yourself into this place like you were always meant to be here, it's shown me what I've been missing, what we've been missing. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm glad you stayed. Not just for Luke, not just because we need a teacher, but because... He trailed off, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. Because you matter, to both of us, in ways I wasn't ready to acknowledge until I thought you might leave. The honesty in his voice, the raw vulnerability of the admission, made Evelyn's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back, maintaining her composure through sheer force of will. I'm not asking for promises, she said quietly, or declarations or anything you're not ready to give. I'm here because I want to be, and that's enough for now. Is it? Caleb's eyes searched her face. Because you gave up a fortune to stay in a place where you've been treated with suspicion and judgment, where the man you came here for has been nothing but difficult and closed off. Seems like you deserve better than enough for now. Maybe. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. But I've learned that better comes from what you build, not what you're promised. So I'll take enough for now and build it into something more, if you're willing to let me try. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his expression working through emotions too complex to name. Finally, he reached out with his calloused hand, palm up, offering without demanding. Evelyn looked at that offered hand, weathered by work, strong despite recent injury, extended with a vulnerability that had clearly cost him to show. She placed her own hand in his, feeling the warmth and roughness of his palm, the gentle certainty of his fingers closing around hers. We'll figure it out as we go, Caleb said softly. No grand promises, no rushing into anything, just seeing what builds between us, given time. That sounds perfect. They stood like that for a moment, hands joined, the future uncertain but no longer frightening. Luke's delighted whoop from the yard broke the spell, and they separated naturally,
both slightly embarrassed but not quite ready to let go of whatever had just shifted between them. Monday morning arrived with the particular quality of brightness that followed desert storms. Evelyn woke early in the small apartment above the schoolhouse, 2 rooms that had been transformed over the weekend into something approaching livable comfort. Ruth had donated furniture, Margaret brought linens, and various families contributed small items until the space felt less like storage and more like home. She dressed carefully in her better dress, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and descended the stairs to the schoolhouse proper. The room glowed in the early light, every surface clean and ready, desks arranged in careful rows, the blackboard blank and waiting to be filled with knowledge. Children began arriving shortly after 8, brought by parents who regarded Evelyn with expressions ranging from hopeful to skeptical. Luke came with Caleb, who'd insisted on accompanying despite his injury, leaning heavily on his crutch as he navigated his son to a desk in the front row. "You'll behave yourself," Caleb told Luke firmly. "You'll listen to Miss Harper, do your work proper, and represent this family with respect." "Yes, Pa." Luke's face glowed with excitement tempered by the seriousness of the moment. Caleb turned to Evelyn, his expression formal but his eyes warm. "Thank you for doing this. For them." "It's my honor," Evelyn said simply. By 9 o'clock, 14 children filled the desks, ranging from 5-year-old Susie Patterson, whose feet didn't touch the floor, to 14-year-old James Chen, who sat in the back with the resigned tolerance of someone who'd rather be working. Evelyn stood before them, her hands steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach, and felt the weight and rightness of the moment settle around her shoulders like a mantle. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Miss Harper, and I'm honored to be your teacher. Some of you have been in school before, and some of you haven't. Some of you can already read and write, and some are just learning your letters. All of that is fine. We're going to work together, learn together, and help each other become the best we can be." She picked up a piece of chalk, turned to the blackboard, and wrote in careful script, "Red Springs School, 1891. "This is where we begin," she said, turning back to face them. "Not where others began, not where we wish we'd started, but where we are right now. And from here, we build." The day unfolded with the particular chaos of a new beginning, children testing boundaries, younger students needing constant attention, older ones pretending boredom while secretly engaged. Evelyn moved among them with patience born of genuine care, correcting without criticism, encouraging without condescension, building the foundation of trust that would make real learning possible. Luke absorbed everything with fierce concentration, his careful handwriting filling his slate with letters and numbers. During the noon break, while other children ate lunches and played outside, he approached Evelyn's desk with something clutched in his small hand. "I wrote something," he said shyly. "For you." Evelyn accepted the paper, unfolding it to reveal careful script that had clearly taken considerable effort. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching. Thank you for being here. Love, Luke." The simple words, formed with such care and sincerity, made Evelyn's throat tighten with emotion. She knelt down, taking Luke's hands in hers. "Thank you for writing the first letter," she said softly. "The one that brought me here. It was the bravest thing anyone's ever done for me." "I'm glad I did it." Luke's smile was radiant, even if it made Pa mad at first. "He's not mad anymore." "I know." The boy's expression turned thoughtful. "He smiles more now. When he thinks I'm not looking, I think maybe he's glad too, even if he doesn't say it much." Evelyn thought of Caleb's careful confession on the porch, his offered hand, the vulnerability he'd shown despite his fear. "I think you're right." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as though the pattern had always existed and they were simply stepping into it. Evelyn taught during the day, her students gradually relaxing into the routine of learning, their initial wariness transforming into engagement. Even James Chen, the oldest and most reluctant, began staying after class to work on mathematics that clearly challenged and intrigued him. Evenings, she often took supper with Caleb and Luke, the 3 of them falling into an easy domesticity that required no labels or definitions. Caleb's leg healed slowly, his mobility increasing with each passing week. As he grew stronger, he began accompanying Evelyn on evening walks, the two of them talking about everything and nothing while Luke chased lizards or collected interesting rocks. They never discussed what they were building between them. It existed in glances held a moment too long, in hands that found each other naturally during those walks, in the comfortable silence that filled spaces between words. It was too new, too fragile to examine directly, so they let it grow in the spaces between intention and action, trust-building one small moment at a time. 6 weeks after school began, Margaret Patterson convened another council meeting. Evelyn stood before the same weathered table, but this time the faces that regarded her held no skepticism, only satisfied approval. "Miss Harper," Margaret said formally, "the council has reviewed your performance as Red Springs' teacher. We've heard from families, observed the children's progress, and assessed the overall impact of reopening the school." Evelyn kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced with anticipation. "It's the unanimous opinion of this council that your 3-month trial period has been more than satisfactory." Margaret allowed herself a rare smile. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position with a modest salary increase to $45 monthly, effective immediately." Relief and joy flooded through Evelyn in equal measure. "I accept. Thank you." "No, Miss Harper, thank you." Margaret stood, extending her hand. "You've given these children something precious, not just education, but hope for futures bigger than this small town. That's worth more than we can ever pay you." The other council members echoed the sentiment, each offering congratulations and thanks. As Evelyn left the meeting, Ruth fell into step beside her, grinning. "Told you that you'd do fine. Margaret doesn't give compliments lightly." "I'm just glad they're satisfied." "Satisfied?" Ruth laughed. "Girl, they're thrilled. Half the families in town are talking about how their children actually want to go to school now. That's practically a miracle in these parts." They walked together through the gathering dusk, the desert air cooling rapidly as the sun descended. At the schoolhouse, Ruth paused, her expression turning more serious. "You know what you've built here goes beyond teaching, right? You've become part of this community's fabric, part of something bigger than lesson plans and arithmetic." "I know." Evelyn looked toward the box R, visible in the distance. "I feel it." "And Caleb, you two figured out what you're building there yet?" Evelyn felt heat climb her cheeks. "We're taking our time." "Nothing wrong with that. Man's been alone a long time, needs to remember how to let someone in." Ruth squeezed her arm affectionately. "Just don't take so long that you forget what you're working toward." That evening, Evelyn found Caleb waiting at the ranch, his leg finally free of the cast, though he still moved with careful deliberation. Luke was spending the night at a friend's house, the first time he'd been away overnight since his mother's death, and the house felt both empty and full of possibility. "I heard about the council meeting," Caleb said, leading her to the porch where 2 chairs waited. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Evelyn settled into her chair, accepting the glass of cool water he offered. "It feels official now. Like I'm really staying." "Were you still doubting it?" "Not doubting, exactly. But there's a difference between choosing to stay and being chosen to stay. The council made it clear I'm wanted here, not just tolerated." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last light was fading. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he'd been building to this moment for some time. "I want you here too. Not just as Luke's teacher or a convenient presence, but—" He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "As someone I'm building toward, if that makes sense." Evelyn's breath caught. "It makes perfect sense. I'm not ready for grand declarations or promises I might not be able to keep." Caleb turned to face her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. "But I'm ready to try, to see what builds between us when we're honest about wanting it to build. If you're willing." "I've been willing for weeks," Evelyn said softly. "I was just waiting for you to catch up." Caleb's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Fair enough." He reached for her hand and she gave it freely, feeling the now familiar warmth of his palm against hers. "So we're doing this? Really doing this?" "Really doing this," Evelyn confirmed. "Whatever this becomes." They sat like that as full darkness descended, hands joined, the future unfolding before them with all its uncertainty and promise. The desert night sang around them, crickets and distant coyotes, wind through sage, the particular silence that wasn't silence at all, but the sound of a living landscape breathing. "Evelyn?" Caleb's voice was quiet but clear. "Yes?" "Thank you for that letter, for Luke's scheme, for everything that brought you here and everything that made you stay." Evelyn turned to look at him, seeing in his face the man he'd been, grieving and closed off and barely surviving, and the man he was becoming, open and hopeful and learning to live again. "Thank you for letting me." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and tentative, carrying the weight of new beginnings and hard-won trust. It tasted of desert dust and coffee and the promise of something built slowly, carefully, with intention and honesty and time. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers with a tenderness that made Evelyn's heart ache. "We'll take it slow," he murmured. "Figure it out as we go." "That sounds perfect." Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures and golden light that painted the desert in shades of amber and rust. The school thrived, its enrollment growing as word spread of the quality of education available. Evelyn's apartment above the schoolhouse remained her official residence, but she spent increasing amounts of time at the Box R, the three of them falling into the rhythms of a family being built from choice rather than circumstance. One evening in late October, as they sat down to supper, Luke looked between the two adults with the serious expression he wore when contemplating weighty matters. "Are you going to get married?" he asked with characteristic directness. Evelyn nearly choked on her water. Caleb set down his fork with deliberate care. "That's a complicated question, son," Caleb said carefully. "Doesn't seem complicated to me." Luke's logic was childlike and irrefutable. "You like each other. Miss Evelyn's here all the time anyway, and I already think of her like she's my ma, even though I know she's not really." Evelyn's eyes stung with sudden tears. She reached across the table, covering Luke's small hand with her own. "I'm honored you think of me that way." "So you'll marry Pa?" Hope blazed in the boy's face. "Luke," Caleb's voice held gentle warning, "these things take time. We can't rush." "Actually," Evelyn interrupted, her heart pounding but her voice steady, "I don't think we need more time to know what we're building here." Caleb's eyes snapped to her face, surprise and something that looked like hope warring in his expression. "Evelyn, I love you," she said simply, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I love Luke. I love this life we're creating together, and I'm not interested in waiting years to make official what we all already know is true." The silence that followed was absolute. Luke held his breath, eyes wide. Caleb stared at her as though she'd spoken in tongues. "You love me," he said slowly, as though testing the reality of the words. "I do. Even though I've been difficult and stubborn and closed off? Because you've been honest about it. Because you've been trying, even when it scared you." Evelyn's voice softened. "Love isn't about perfection, Caleb. It's about choosing each other anyway, flaws and all." Caleb pushed back from the table and moved around to where she sat, dropping to one knee with the care of someone whose legs still remembered its injury. He took both her hands in his expression raw with emotion. "I love you too," he said, the words coming out rough but certain. "I've been trying not to, trying to stay safe behind walls I built to protect myself, but you scaled those walls anyway, patient and persistent and refusing to give up on us." He paused, swallowing hard. "Marry me. Not because it's expected or convenient, but because I want to spend the rest of my life building this future with you." Evelyn's tears spilled over, joy and relief and love all tangled together in her chest. "Yes." Luke's whoop of triumph made them both laugh, breaking the intensity of the moment. Caleb pulled Evelyn to her feet and kissed her properly, thoroughly, in a way that made promises words couldn't capture. When they finally pulled apart, Luke was dancing around the kitchen, his happiness infectious and absolute. "We're going to be a real family," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "A whole family again." "We already were," Evelyn said, pulling him into their embrace. "We just made it official." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony beside the creek that ran through Caleb's property.
The whole town turned out, bringing food and music and the genuine warmth of a community celebrating one of their own. Ruth stood as Evelyn's witness, Margaret as Caleb's, and Luke held the rings with a solemnity that broke halfway through when he grinned so wide his face couldn't contain it. Evelyn wore a dress donated by the ranch wives, altered to fit her perfectly, simple but beautiful. Caleb wore his best shirt and a tie that Luke had insisted on, though he tugged at it uncomfortably throughout the ceremony. None of it mattered. What mattered was the vows they spoke. Simple words carrying the weight of commitment earned through difficulty, trust built in small moments, and love that had grown despite every reason not to. "I choose you," Caleb said, his voice steady and sure. "Today and all the days after. Not because circumstance forced us together, but because I want every one of those days to include you." "I choose you," Evelyn echoed, her voice thick with emotion. "And I choose this life, this place, this family, not the one I inherited or was promised, but the one we built together." When the minister pronounced them married, the kiss that sealed it carried not just love, but triumph. The victory of choice over circumstance, of hope over fear, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The celebration lasted into the evening, the creek bank transformed by lantern light and laughter. Children played while adults talked and danced, the community embracing this union as their own victory. Even Frank, who'd been so suspicious at the council meeting months ago, raised a glass in Evelyn's honor. "You proved me wrong," he admitted, slightly sheepish. "About your character, your commitment. This town's better for having you." "Thank you," Evelyn said, accepting the olive branch with grace. As the stars emerged and the party wound down, Evelyn found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching her new family, Caleb talking with neighbors, Luke asleep against Ruth's shoulder, exhausted by excitement. This was her life now, built from a child's faith and a man's reluctant trust, and her own stubborn determination to create something worth keeping. Ruth appeared beside her, 2 cups of punch in hand. "Quite a journey from that train platform to here." "The longest mile of my life," Evelyn agreed. "And the best." "No regrets about the inheritance?" Evelyn thought about it honestly, searching for any shadow of doubt or second-guessing. She found none. "Not even a little. Money can't buy what I have here." "No, it can't." Ruth raised her cup in a toast. "To choosing wisely, even when it looks like madness to everyone else." "To choosing it all," Evelyn countered, touching her cup to Ruth's. "That's the real gift." A year later, Evelyn stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching her students file out, their voices carrying the particular joy of children released into summer freedom. The school year had been her most successful yet. Enrollment had doubled, and 3 of her older students had passed examinations that would allow them to continue their education in Santa Fe. Luke raced past with a group of friends, pausing only long enough to wave. "See you at home, Ma." The word still made Evelyn's heart catch. Not because she was trying to replace his mother, but because she'd earned the title through 1,000 small moments of care and commitment. Home. That's what the Box R had become. Not just a place she lived, but the center of a life she'd built with her own hands. Caleb appeared in the doorway, no longer favoring his once-injured leg, his face weathered by sun, but lighter somehow, as though 2 years of grief had finally released their grip. He held a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Thought you might want company for lunch," he said, his smile warm and easy in a way that still surprised her with its openness. "Always." Evelyn locked the schoolhouse and took his offered arm. They walked together through the spring afternoon, past the town that had become truly home, toward the ranch where Luke would be waiting with whatever project currently consumed his boundless energy. "I've been thinking," Caleb said as they walked, "about expanding the house, adding a proper room or 2. We might be needing the space before long." Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, protecting the secret she'd only just confirmed. "How did you know?" "The way you've been looking lately, like you're carrying something precious and terrifying in equal measure." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression soft with wonder. "Are we?" "We are." Evelyn watched joy transform his features. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Caleb pulled her close, his embrace both protective and celebrating. Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed, but mostly just grateful that you came here, that you stayed, that you chose this life with all its complications and challenges. I'd choose it again, Evelyn said against his shoulder, every single time.
They stood like that for a moment, two people who'd found each other through the most unlikely circumstances, who'd built something solid from broken pieces and desperate hopes. Behind them, Red Springs went about its daily business, cattle lowing, hammers ringing, children playing, the sounds of a community living and growing, woven together by threads of mutual support and shared purpose. Ahead, the Boxar waited, its weathered board speaking of survival and transformation, its foundation solid beneath additions that marked growth and change. Luke would be there, probably covered in dirt from whatever adventure he'd invented, his face lighting up when he saw them approaching. Soon, there would be another child to fill those rooms with noise and life, another thread binding them together. Evelyn thought of the letter that had started everything, careful childish script expressing a need that no adult had known how to articulate. She thought of stepping off that train into judgment and rejection, of choosing to stay despite having every reason to leave, of building this life one difficult choice at a time. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle with curiosity. "That I'm glad Luke wrote that letter, that I'm glad I came and stayed and chose this instead of what I thought I wanted." She looked up at him, seeing in his face her future, their future, stretching out with all its uncertainty and promise, that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never knew we were looking for. Caleb kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become their language for things too big for words. "Come on. Luke's probably wondering where we are, and there's cold chicken and pie waiting." They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, their hands linked, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. The life they'd built wasn't grand or remarkable to outside eyes, just a ranch, a school, a family formed from necessity and choice in equal measure. But it was theirs, earned through honesty and patience and the courage to believe that sometimes the right choice was the hard one. That evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Luke leaned against Evelyn's shoulder with the comfortable trust of a child who knew he was loved. "Tell me the story again," he said, "about how you came here." Evelyn smiled, her hand finding Caleb's, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "Once upon a time, a very brave boy wrote a letter he wasn't supposed to write, and that letter brought someone who was lost looking for home to a place that needed her just as much as she needed it." "And they all lived happily ever after?" Luke asked, though he knew the answer. "They built happily ever after," Evelyn corrected gently. "One day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And they're still building it right now, together." Luke nodded, satisfied with this version that acknowledged both the work and the worth of what they'd created. The desert night descended around them, vast and star-filled and infinite with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to prove that the life they'd built could weather whatever came. But tonight, they simply sat together, a family not bound by blood or obligation, but by choice and commitment and the particular kind of love that grows when you choose each other daily, deliberately, despite all the easier paths not taken. The ranch breathed around them, solid and welcoming, speaking its own language of home and belonging. And in that moment, Evelyn Harper Rowan knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the easy one or the expected one or the one that made sense to anyone looking in from outside, but the right one, the one that led here, to this porch, with this man and this child, and the future growing inside her, building something that mattered more than money or security or any inheritance she could have claimed. She'd come to New Mexico looking for a future someone else had promised. Instead, she'd found one worth building herself, and that made all the difference.